At the family reunion I paid for, ribs sizzling, laughter in the air, fairy lights twinkling over the tables I set up with trembling hands, my sister Carla raised her wineglass and sneered, "You're just a cash machine, Lena, not my sister." Her words sliced through the summer warmth like a knife through bone. Laughter followed, sharp and careless. I stood frozen, the woman who'd poured $12,000 into their lives, now dressed down like I was dirt on her shoe. But worse than that, my own nephew Dylan, the boy I helped raise, the boy I bought ring lights and editing software for, leaned back in his chair and grinned. "You owe me for my dream." I smiled, just once, then whispered, "Then pay your own $12,000. They thought I'd never stop funding their fantasy. That night I cut off every transfer, every bill, every lifeline, and by morning, the screaming began. They thought they broke me that night, but that was the moment I woke up and started something they never saw coming. I thought the worst part was the sting of Carla's words in front of 30 people, but the real wound was the silence that followed. Not one person, not one, stood up for me. If you've ever stood in a room full of people and still felt invisible, hit that like. You're not alone. Funny how one sentence can set fire to a life you thought was yours. 3 months earlier? My name is Lena Hartman. I'm 33 years old, a data analyst living in Denver, and until last summer I thought I understood what family meant. For years, I poured $12,000 a year into my sister Carla's rent, into her son Dylan's influencer dreams, cameras, ring lights, editing software, subscriptions he swore would launch him to fame. I told myself it was just money, that supporting them meant I still belonged to something bigger than myself. But family has a strange way of showing you what you really are to them. And last summer, at a barbecue that was supposed to bring us together, I learned the truth. It was our annual family reunion, the kind of gathering where the air smells of smoke and sizzling meat, where string lights flicker as the sun sinks behind the mountains, and cousins chase each other barefoot through the grass. Carla insisted we host it in her backyard again. She said tradition mattered, though part of me suspected she just liked the control. Her yard smelled of lighter fluid and charcoal, her picnic tables lined with paper plates that buckled under piles of ribs and cornbread. Laughter rose and fell around me, but I barely heard it. I was watching her, watching the way she leaned in toward relatives, her wine glass tilting dangerously as she gestured, her words sharp enough to slice through the warm summer air. She shredded me in front of everyone. That's the only way to describe it. I can't remember every sentence. Shock tends to blur things. But I remember the laughter after each jab, the way people shifted uncomfortably and then looked away. She called me controlling. She called me selfish. She said Dylan deserved every chance and that I, with my spreadsheets and steady job, didn't understand real passion. And she didn't stop there. She said I wasn't really family anymore, not since I put my career first. Her words weren't just careless, they were aimed to wound, and they hit their mark. I stood there with a paper plate of brisket going cold in my hands, my stomach twisted tight. I wanted to answer back, to scream that I'd been paying her rent, her Wi-Fi, Dylan's endless list of tech gadgets. But my throat closed. Instead, I swallowed the lump in my chest and nodded like her words didn't tear through me. No one defended me, not one person. I smiled at relatives I barely recognized, tried to hold my head high while inside. Something cracked. Have you ever felt the ground tilt beneath you when someone you love slices you open with nothing but their tongue? That's what it felt like. By the time I got back to my Denver loft that night, my body was buzzing with adrenaline. My building is all glass and steel, perched high enough that I can see the whole city lit up like a circuit board. Normally that view calms me, but that night, the skyline felt like 1,000 eyes staring in, daring me to finally see the truth. I dropped my bag on the hardwood floor, still smelling faintly of barbecue smoke, and sat at my desk. My laptop hummed as it came alive, the glow spilling over my trembling hands. I opened my banking apps, my recurring payments, and stared at the list. Rent transfers to Carla, subscriptions under Dylan's name, even insurance payments they never thanked me for. Line after line, reminder after reminder that my life had become a pipeline feeding theirs. My chest rose and fell too fast. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. Could I really do it? Could I really cut them off? A part of me whispered, "They're family." Another voice, sharper, said, You're just their wallet. I thought my money bought me family, but in that moment I finally understood. It never did. They never saw me, never cared about me. I was a bank account with a heartbeat. That realization hurt more than Carla's words at the barbecue. Betrayal is one thing, but realizing you've been complicit in your own erasure? That's its own kind of cruelty. I clicked cancel. First the rent payment, then the subscription for Dylan's editing software, then his streaming platform. Each confirmation popped up with a sterile little check mark, as if severing years of sacrifice was no different than unsubscribing from a newsletter. My hands shook so badly I had to steady them on the edge of the desk. My heart hammered as though I'd leapt off a cliff. But with each cancellation, the chain around my chest loosened a fraction. By the time I closed my laptop, the room was silent, save for the muffled hum of traffic drifting up from the streets below. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the glass windows. Denver stretched out before me, lights twinkling like stars scattered on the ground. I wondered what they were doing at that exact moment. Carla rinsing wine glasses, Dylan scrolling through comments on his latest video, both oblivious that their world had just shifted under them. Did they feel the ground shake yet? Did they have any idea? Probably not. But by morning they would. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the taste of smoke still clinging to my hair, Carla's words replaying over and over. You're not really family. Not since you put your career first. I could still hear the laughter, the awkward silence that followed, the way no one reached out to me. I kept asking myself, how did we get here? When did helping them turn into erasing myself? And more importantly, why was Carla so obsessed with Dylan's influencer dreams? Why was she willing to sacrifice everything, even her sister, for the sake of a boy with a ring light and a shaky camera? By morning, the chaos began. My phone buzzed relentlessly with notifications, emails from landlords, missed calls from Carla, frantic messages piling up. I sat at my desk again, watching the city wake up, the sun burning gold against the glass towers. My hands were steadier now. My decision was final. I knew nothing would ever be the same, and for the first time in years, that thought didn't terrify me. It electrified me. Because sometimes the only way to find out who you are to people is to take away what you've been giving. And when you do, you learn the truth, whether you're ready or not. When I think back, I realize the betrayal at that barbecue didn't start in that backyard. It began years earlier, in the quiet streets of the Denver suburb where Carla and I grew up. Our house sat on a cul-de-sac lined with identical ranch homes, each with trimmed lawns and chain-link fences. On summer nights, cicadas hummed from the trees, and the smell of grilled hamburgers drifted from neighbors' porches. It looked ordinary, but inside, the patterns of favoritism were already being carved into the walls. I was 12 when I first noticed the imbalance. My report card came in, straight A's across the board. I had studied so hard my fingers ached from scribbling notes, the skin around my nails bitten raw from nerves. I walked into the kitchen, heart pounding, hoping for a smile that lingered or even a hug. Carla barely looked up from folding laundry. "Nice job," she said casually, like she was checking the weather. And then, minutes later, Dylan came running in with one of his little camcorders. He had filmed some shaky, barely audible vlog about his day at school. Carla squealed with pride, hugged him, and the next day, he had a brand new phone in his hand. I remember staring at that phone, shiny and expensive, and wondering why my achievements earned only a pat on the head while his fumbling earned applause. Why was Dylan always the star, while I faded into nothing? That night, I sat with Carla on the back porch. The sky was a blanket of stars, endless and heavy, and in that moment, I wanted so badly to believe in us. She reached over, her pinky hooking around mine, and whispered, "We'll always share everything, no matter what." I clung to that promise like it was scripture. It didn't matter that she favored Dylan. It didn't matter that my victories were small and unnoticed. She was my sister, and under that starry sky, her words felt unbreakable. I didn't know then that promises could die so quietly. By the time I was 20, life had shifted. Carla's marriage collapsed, her divorce stripping her down to bills and regret. She was broke, and suddenly the weight of her choices bled into my life. I was a college student trying to keep my head above water, balancing classes with shifts at a coffee shop that smelled perpetually of burnt espresso and sour milk. My apron was stiff with dried foam, and my shoes stuck to the floor as I rushed between machines that hissed like they were alive. Every tip felt like a lifeline, every latte another brick in the wall between surviving and sinking. Yet even then, Carla was funneling what little she had into Dylan's so-called brand, cheap merchandise, half-baked ads, endless tech upgrades. She told me it was for his future, that one day it would all pay off. Meanwhile, I scraped coins from my pocket for ramen noodles. I lay awake in my dorm room at night, staring at the cracked ceiling, the faint glow of the campus lamppost leaking through the blinds. My roommate snored softly, the radiator clanged, and my mind replayed the same question over and over. Why wasn't I ever enough? I could get good grades, I could work myself into exhaustion, but nothing seemed to matter. Carla funneled money to Dylan's brand while I carried debts that never shrank. It was as if her love had a spotlight, and it only ever shined on him. One weekend, I visited her house. Boxes from the divorce still cluttered the hallway, her old journals stacked on top of each other in the attic like forgotten relics. Dust floated in the narrow beam of light from the attic window, settling on the cracked leather covers. I picked one up once, turning it over in my hands. The spine creaked, fragile and worn, but I didn't open it. I don't know why. Maybe I thought it was too private. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd find inside. I slid it back into the stack, the dust clinging to my fingers, and told myself it didn't matter. But that memory haunts me even now. Because later I'd wonder, what secrets had Carla already hidden back then? What truths were buried in those pages that could have explained everything? Sometimes I try to imagine how I looked to her in those years. A tired college kid with dark circles under her eyes, juggling loans, scraping by, and still sending bits of money whenever Carla called with another emergency. I wanted to believe she noticed. I wanted to believe that somewhere, behind her obsession with Dylan's potential, she still saw me. But if she did, she never said it. Her attention always drifted back to him, like a compass stuck on a single direction. I remember one night, after a brutal double shift at the cafe, my apron still smelling of burnt milk, I sat on the edge of my narrow dorm bed. My hands were blistered from scrubbing machines, my hair damp with sweat. I opened my laptop and scrolled through Dylan's newest video. He was laughing into the camera, wearing a hoodie I had bought him last Christmas. His hair was styled, his ring light reflected in his eyes. And in the comments, people called him talented, called him charismatic. They had no idea that his stage was built on my exhaustion. I closed the laptop so hard it rattled, tears burning the back of my eyes. I whispered to myself, when is it my turn? When do I get to be seen? But the truth is, I never stopped hoping. I kept replaying Carla's voice from that night on the porch, under the stars. We'll always share everything. Maybe that was why I kept giving. Maybe I thought if I sacrificed enough, if I kept pouring into them, eventually she'd look back at me and remember her promise. Maybe I believed I could buy my way into her love. Looking back, I see how dangerous that hope was. It blinded me to the imbalance, to the way Carla's choices carved deeper scars into me than I admitted. And somewhere in her attic, those journals still waited, pages pressed together like lips holding a secret. I should have opened them. I should have known. But I didn't. And that ignorance shaped everything that followed. I was 25 when it finally felt like the years of grinding had paid off. After countless nights of studying under flickering dorm lights and dragging myself through double shifts that left my apron soaked with the smell of burnt espresso, I landed a fintech job in downtown Denver. The offer was staggering, $110,000 a year. My laptop buzzed with new projects and code that carried more promise than anything I had ever touched before. My apartment reflected that promise, sleek, modern, a glass-walled loft that caught the city lights like a prism. At night, I'd sit at my desk, my screen glowing, while below me the streets pulsed with traffic, sirens, and the low murmur of bars just waking up. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just scraping by. I had arrived. But family has a way of testing the foundations you think are solid. The calls began almost immediately. Carla's number would flash on my phone, and even before I picked up, I knew the script. Her voice carried the same weary tremble, a sigh that seemed rehearsed. "Lena, I don't know how I'm going to make rent this month." A week later. "Dylan's camera is breaking down. He can't keep posting content like this." Then it was the Wi-Fi bill, then insurance, then Dylan needed new editing software. The emergencies piled up like dominoes, falling one after another until I couldn't remember the last time she called, just to ask how I was doing. Every time I hit transfer on another $1,000 for Carla's apartment or $500 for Dylan's so-called career, I felt the locket around my neck grow heavier. It was small, silver, and carried a sliver of my savings inside, a symbol I had once cherished as a reminder of my independence. But now it felt like a leash, dragging me back to responsibilities that weren't mine. Still, I told myself it was only temporary. Carla had gone through a divorce. Dylan was young and ambitious. Just a little longer, I thought. Just until she gets steady work. Just until Dylan makes it. But temporary stretched into years, each month bleeding into the next. My coworkers teased me about my salary, calling me the lucky one with single-girl disposable income. If only they knew that nearly half of it evaporated before I could even breathe. They booked vacations to Hawaii and Paris, while I spent my nights scrolling through Dylan's shaky vlogs that my money had bankrolled, my chest hollowing out with every second I watched. One evening, my coworker Maya suggested we grab drinks after work. She was sharp, practical, the type of person who could see through any illusion. We sat in a booth under buzzing neon lights, the smell of fried food thick in the air. I remember fiddling with my glass, condensation slipping between my fingers, as I spilled out another story about Carla's latest crisis. Maya listened, silent at first, her eyes steady on mine. Then she leaned forward, her voice cutting clean through the noise of the bar. "Lena, you're their ATM, not their sister." Her words hit me like a slap across the face. I laughed it off too quickly, my voice cracking as I tried to dismiss it. "They're family. What else can I do?" The words tumbled out, brittle and weak. Even I could hear how hollow they sounded. Maya didn't argue. She just held my gaze for a long moment, the kind of look that follows you home even when you want to shake it off. That night, back in my loft, I stood by the window, watching the city flicker below. Headlights weaved through the grid of streets like fireflies, their light reflecting off the glass, casting shifting patterns across my walls. I unclasped the locket and rolled it in my palm. Its weight felt wrong, too heavy for something so small. It had stopped being a symbol of savings or safety. Now it was a reminder of every dollar that slipped from my account into theirs. "If I keep giving, maybe they'll finally see me," I whispered into the empty room. My voice sounded strange, like someone else's, but doubt had already begun to seep in. Visiting Carla's house made the imbalance impossible to ignore. The place was cluttered with boxes, ring lights leaning against the walls, and a desk overflowing with wires and camera equipment. Dylan sprawled on the couch, scrolling endlessly on his phone, his face illuminated by the glow of a screen. The house smelled of takeout containers stacked on the counter, grease seeping into the air. Unpaid bills peeked out from under piles of menus, unopened envelopes lying like accusations no one wanted to face. I asked Carla once, cautiously, if her ex-husband contributed anything. She bristled instantly, snapping, "Don't worry about him. We're fine." Another time, she laughed it off, waving her hand like the question itself was absurd, but she never answered. The way her voice tightened, the way her eyes flicked away from mine, those moments unsettled me. What was she hiding? Why dodge a question that should have been simple? I told myself not to pry. I told myself that if I just kept supporting them, if I kept shouldering the weight, maybe one day Carla would look at me the way she used to, back when we pinky swore under the stars. Maybe Dylan would finally thank me. Maybe, just maybe, I'd stop being invisible. But the truth pressed harder each day. I'd return to my apartment after wiring them another 1,000, the hum of the city outside my window both comforting and mocking. My fingers would hover over the locket at my chest, pressing it like a wound. In the dark, with only the glow of the skyline keeping me company, I felt the ache of frustration rise. Was Maya right? Was I nothing more to them than an endless stream of cash? And yet, even with doubt gnawing at me, I couldn't stop. Hope was a cruel drug, and I was hooked on the fantasy that one day they would finally see me. The brewery was alive with sound that Friday night, the kind of sound that wrapped itself around you until you almost forgot the weight you carried in. Glasses clinked and echoed under the hum of neon signs buzzing faintly overhead, washing the walls in pinks and blues. The air smelled of hops and fried food, rich and sharp, while a faint draft from the front door carried in the cold bite of Denver's spring air every time it opened. Wooden tables stretched across the floor, nicked and scarred from years of restless hands, and people leaned over them with flushed faces, their voices spilling into laughter that felt too loud, too easy. Maya sat across from me, her beer glass sweating between her hands, her expression far too steady for the chaos of the room. She had a way of anchoring herself no matter where we were, like she was immune to distraction. I, on the other hand, couldn't stop fidgeting. My coaster was already shredded in my hands, bits of damp cardboard sticking to my fingers. I'd just finished telling her about Carla's latest plea, how rent was overdue again, how Dylan's camera had broken, and she was convinced he needed a better one, how the Wi-Fi was about to be cut off. My chest had been tight the whole time, my words spilling faster than I intended, tinged with a frustration I tried to mask as casual concern. Maya tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes narrowing with the kind of clarity that always made me feel both seen and exposed. She tapped her glass once against the wood, a deliberate sound that cut through the background noise like a gavel. Then she said it, her voice calm but unshakable. "That locket's a leash, Lena." Her words landed so heavily I froze. My hand immediately rose to the chain around my neck, fingertips brushing the familiar weight at my collarbone. A leash. The word twisted in my stomach. To me, the locket had always been a private symbol of discipline, of saving, of the promise that one day I would have something of my own. But hearing her call it that, like I wasn't carrying a symbol of sacrifice but a tether, made my throat tighten. I tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. "It's not like that," I said, though my voice betrayed me with a crack I couldn't hide. "She's my sister." Maya didn't argue. She just looked at me, steady and unblinking, the noise of the brewery fading to a dull hum in my ears. I brought my glass to my lips, but the beer had turned bitter, heavy on my tongue. I couldn't swallow. Later that night, back in my apartment, the quiet hit me harder than the noise ever could. The city stretched outside my windows, lights twinkling like scattered stars, but inside it was only me, the faint hum of my laptop, and the echo of Maya's words still cutting through my thoughts. A leash. Could she be right? I sat down at my desk, the glow of the screen painting my face in pale blue. Emails piled in, half work, half junk. I scrolled mindlessly until one subject line snagged me, Dylan's vlog partnership invoice. I hovered for a moment, heart thudding, before clicking. The spreadsheet unfolded neatly, rows of numbers laid out with brutal clarity. Sponsorship deals, ad revenue streams, neatly cataloged payments. My eyes darted to the bottom, where a name I never expected to see appeared, Carla. Next to it, 50%. I stared, my pulse roaring in my ears. 50%. She had been skimming half of Dylan's ad revenue, half of the money that I had funneled into cameras and software and endless bills. She was profiting directly off me, off every dollar I had poured into them without question. My stomach clenched. The beer from earlier curdled in my throat. My hands trembled so hard the cursor blinked across the screen like it was mocking me. Carla, my sister, the one who had hooked her pinky with mine under the stars and promised we'd share everything. She had been siphoning money behind my back, turning my sacrifices into her profit. I slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing too loud in the silence of the room. My breath came shallow, my heart hammering against the locket like it wanted to break free. "Carla wouldn't stab me in the back, would she?" I whispered, the words barely forming before they dissolved into the empty air. The next day at work, my fingers hovered uselessly over the keyboard. Lines of code blurred into meaningless shapes, my concentration scattered like sand in the wind. Every click felt hollow, each keystroke punctuated by the same thought. She wouldn't. She couldn't. That evening, Maya and I ended up back at the brewery, though this time the neon glow felt harsher, the laughter sharper. I told her what I'd found, words rushing out like a dam breaking. My voice wavered between disbelief and desperation. She didn't interrupt, didn't gasp, didn't even look surprised. She just listened, her eyes locked on mine with quiet certainty. "She's my sister. She wouldn't do that," I insisted, almost pleading. I needed her to agree, to give me something to hold on to. But Maya didn't agree. She didn't nod, didn't soften. She just kept staring, skeptical and steady, her silence heavier than any judgment she could have spoken. That look followed me as I left, haunting me in a way her words never could. The night air outside was sharp and cold, the kind that made your lungs sting with every breath. The brewery's noise faded behind me, replaced by the muffled rush of traffic and the uneven thud of my heart. Streetlights painted everything in a dull, amber glow, but I felt swallowed by shadows, the weight of truth pressing closer with every step toward my loft. Back inside, I sank into the dark. The laptop shut tight but still glowing in my memory, every number etched into my mind. I touched the locket at my throat, but it no longer felt like a symbol. It felt like a chain, and every memory of Carla's desperate calls replayed in my head, distorted now, each plea reframed by betrayal. I wanted to believe I was wrong. I wanted to believe she was still the sister who swore under the stars that we'd share everything. But denial only stretched so far. And in the silence of that night, with only the city lights flickering outside, doubt rooted itself deep, refusing to let go. I thought if I could just get everyone together, maybe things would finally feel right again. Maybe laughter could replace silence, and food could be the glue that held us, even if the cracks beneath still showed. That's why I decided to host the family reunion barbecue at my loft. My heart pounded with equal parts excitement and fear as I dragged bags of supplies into my kitchen. I spent nearly $500, money I probably shouldn't have spent, on brisket marinated for 2 days, on bottles of craft beer with labels so beautiful I thought even Dylan might post them to his story, and on fairy lights that I strung across the edges of my balcony. The loft smelled like garlic, paprika, and smoked meat, layered with the faint tang of cleaner I had used to scrub every surface until it gleamed. I climbed onto a chair, stretching to hook a strand of lights around the window frame, and for a moment I just stood there, staring at the reflection in the glass. My little world glowed warm, like something out of a catalog. I could almost picture it, the sound of cousins laughing, Aunt Rosa humming along with music, Carla actually smiling at me instead of sneering. Maybe this barbecue would make us a real family. That hope carried me until I called Carla. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp even before I'd finished explaining. "At your place? No, Lena. It has to be at my backyard. That's tradition." I froze, staring at the neat rows of brisket I'd already seasoned. "Carla, I've already—" Her laugh cut through me like broken glass. It wasn't joyful, just dismissive. "Your place is too bougie. Nobody's going to feel comfortable there." The word hit me harder than I expected. Bougie. As if my effort, my money, my desperate attempt to create something meaningful was nothing more than a show, a performance. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to swallow the sting. "Okay, sure. Your place," I said. My voice sounded flat, mechanical, like I'd handed over not just the event, but a piece of my hope. So I packed everything: fairy lights, brisket, beer, even the serving platters I had polished until they reflected light like mirrors, into the trunk of my car. The fairy lights tangled easily, and as I wound them carefully around my arm, each bulb knocked gently against the next, a delicate sound like bells tolling for a funeral. The drive out of downtown Denver felt heavier than usual. The glittering skyline shrank in my rearview mirror, replaced by wide streets lined with identical houses and trimmed lawns. The further I drove, the quieter it got. No sirens, no car horns, just the soft hum of tires against asphalt. By the time I turned into Carla's cul-de-sac, the air smelled faintly of cut grass and lighter fluid. Suburban silence pressed against me, and suddenly my fairy lights felt out of place, too fragile for this backyard. Her yard was wide but plain, patchy grass, folding chairs stacked against the fence, and an old grill crouched in the corner, blackened by years of use. It was functional, yes, but nothing about it sparkled. I hauled the bags inside, straps digging into my hands until the skin burned. Sweat gathered at the back of my neck as I set everything down on her kitchen counter. That's when I noticed something slip from one of the bags. At first, I thought it was just a napkin, but the folded paper caught my eye. It was thin, anonymous, with letters pressed so hard they left dents on the page. Check Carla's journal. My breath snagged in my throat. I turned the paper over, half expecting to see a name, a clue, anything, but it was blank. I traced the letters with my thumb, the rough texture of the paper grounding me as my pulse raced. Carla's journal. My mind leapt instantly to her attic, to the leather-bound books stacked in uneven piles after her divorce. I remembered brushing dust off 1 year ago, feeling the weight of it in my hands but stopping myself from opening it. I'd told myself then that it was too private, but now, staring at this note, I wondered, had I been protecting her privacy or protecting myself from truths I didn't want to face? Who wrote this? Why now? I looked around Carla's kitchen, the cluttered counters, the faint hum of her refrigerator, the greasy smell of takeout containers in the trash. Everything felt ordinary, and yet suddenly, every object hummed with suspicion. Even the refrigerator's buzz sounded like it was holding a secret. I folded the note carefully, slipping it into my pocket as though someone might walk in and snatch it from me. My heart thudded against my ribs, each beat too loud, too heavy. Was it a warning? A trap? Or was it a lifeline from someone who wanted me to finally see? The fairy lights in my arms felt heavier than they had in the loft, their bulbs clinking like accusations. I forced my hands to keep moving, to unwrap the brisket, to line up the craft beers on the counter, to untangle the lights and drape them over her chairs. But my mind wasn't on the barbecue anymore. It was upstairs, in the attic, with those journals. I wanted to believe that this barbecue would bring us together, that the smell of grilled meat and the glow of fairy lights would soften the edges between us. But as I tucked the note deeper into my pocket, one thought gnawed at me. Maybe the journals would tell me something I wasn't ready to know. Hope still lingered. I clung to it like a child clutching a blanket. But beneath it, unease pulsed steady, whispering that this reunion wasn't going to be what I imagined. Maybe this barbecue would make us a real family. Or maybe it would rip open wounds I'd never fully understood. The July sun clung to my skin like a second punishment. Heat shimmered off the concrete driveway, and each trip from my car to Carla's backyard felt heavier than the last. My arms ached from hauling trays of marinated brisket, coolers of craft beer, and boxes of decorations. The plastic handles of the cooler cut grooves into my palms so deep I had to flex my fingers just to feel them again. Sweat stung my eyes, blurring the suburban houses around me into a haze of beige siding and manicured lawns. Carla's backyard stretched wide but lifeless, a rectangle of patchy grass hemmed in by a leaning wooden fence. Folding tables leaned against it, paint peeling, legs squeaking whenever I shifted them into place. In the corner, her old grill stood like a sentinel, its grates blackened and warped from years of grease and flame. The faint smell of lighter fluid lingered in the air, sharp and chemical, promising smoke that would cling to my clothes long after the night ended. I bent to untangle a strand of fairy lights, their bulbs clinking softly like bells in the still air. My shirt clung to my back, damp with sweat, when the backyard gate creaked open. Dylan strolled in, his phone angled high as if the entire world had been waiting for his entrance. "Yo, fam, barbecue's about to be lit," he shouted into his live stream, pivoting so the camera caught the grill and the tables. He strutted across the grass in a hoodie despite the sweltering heat, his sneakers pristine white, the hood casting a shadow over eyes that never left his screen. Relatives swarmed around him like moths to a light. "There's the star," one uncle cheered. "Dylan, how's that $1 million deal coming along?" another asked, their faces alight with admiration. He grinned, soaking it in, answering with vague promises about sponsors and the next big project. Not one of them asked about the coolers I had lugged across the yard, or the trays of food stacked on the table. My arms still trembled from the weight, but I might as well have been invisible. I gritted my teeth and turned back to the lights, forcing my focus onto the thin wire digging into my damp fingers. That's when I heard Carla's voice, sharp and cutting, drifting through the open kitchen window. "She's just handling food. Lena's too selfish for more." The words froze me mid-motion. My hand slipped, the light sagging against the table leg. Selfish? After everything I'd given? After the rent, the cameras, the Wi-Fi bills, the insurance? After years of swallowing my pride to keep her afloat? My throat constricted, as if the grill smoke had already wrapped around me, choking me silent. For a moment, I wanted to storm inside, to make her say it to my face. But before I could move, Aunt Rosa appeared from around the house, her arms stacked with folded tablecloths. She was older now, hair streaked with gray, her movements slower, but her presence was steady as ever. She caught my eye and smiled, warm and grounding. "Lena, these go on the long table, right?" she asked, her voice carrying the softness I had been craving all day. "Yeah," I managed, swallowing the ache in my throat. "Thanks, Rosa." As we spread the cloth together, her hum rose softly, a tune I hadn't heard since childhood. It was the one she used to sing when sewing patches onto old jeans, a rhythm that steadied restless hearts. For the first time that afternoon, I didn't feel completely alone. Then Mia slipped in beside me. She moved quietly, sliding a stack of paper plates onto the table, her movements too deliberate for casual help. Her eyes flicked around the yard, making sure no one was near, before she leaned in close. "I wrote the note," she whispered. The words jolted through me, my breath catching. "What?" Her gaze darted toward Carla, who was laughing near the grill, her voice carrying over the yard like smoke that stings the eyes. Then Mia looked back, her expression sharp, far older than her 20-something years should have made her. "I wrote the note, about the journal." My pulse hammered, the world narrowing to just her whisper and my pounding heartbeat. "Why?" I whispered back, my voice trembling. She shook her head quickly, eyes dropping to the plates in her hands. "Carla's hiding something big. I can't say here, just don't ignore it." Then, just as swiftly, she straightened her posture and set the plates down with a casual clatter. To anyone else, it looked like ordinary small talk, another cousin helping set the table. But my chest thrummed with the weight of her words. The note hadn't been an accident. Someone else had seen what I was too blind or too afraid to face. Carla's laughter rose again, slicing across the yard. She had gathered a circle of relatives around her, gesturing toward the bottles of craft beer I'd brought. "Look at Lena's overpriced beers," she sneered, her words dripping with sarcasm. "She probably thinks the labels make them taste better." The group chuckled, some half-heartedly, others with discomfort flickering across their faces. I felt my cheeks burn, hotter than the July sun. My hands clenched the tablecloth until wrinkles creased its smooth surface. Why does Carla always tear me down? I lifted my eyes and caught Rosa's gaze from across the yard. She gave me a small nod, as if to remind me I wasn't completely abandoned here, and Mia, still aligning cups with deliberate care, didn't meet my eye again, but her whispered confession lingered between us like a secret promise. The grill hissed to life, flames licking at the blackened grates, smoke curling into the air in dark ribbons that stung my throat. I stood frozen in that moment, straddling the line between hope and dread, surrounded by family yet suffocated by mockery, mocked by Carla yet anchored by Rosa's quiet kindness, bruised by her insults but fueled by Mia's whispered truth. This wasn't just a barbecue, it was a battlefield, and though the war had only begun, I could feel the first wounds already burning. The sky over Denver was a canvas of molten gold and violet by the time everyone settled into Carla's backyard. The Rockies in the distance caught the last light, their peaks glowing as if they had been set aflame. The strings of fairy lights I had brought from my loft shimmered against the gathering dusk, tiny sparks winking above the long tables I'd dressed with Rosa earlier. The air was thick with the mingled scents of mesquite smoke, sizzling meat, and sweet buttered cornbread. From a speaker on the porch, country music drifted out, the low drawl of a singer folding into the clinking of silverware, and the laughter of cousins chasing each other across the lawn. I stood by the food table, adjusting platters for the third time, though they were already perfect. Golden cornbread sat in neat squares, brisket glistened with juices that reflected the sunset, and tubs of craft beer sweated onto the grass, each bottle clinking softly against its neighbors. For a fleeting second, I let myself believe this was enough. Maybe this barbecue would finally feel like family, like unity instead of fracture. Carla's voice shattered that fragile illusion. She was near the grill, her arm draped possessively around Dylan's shoulders, her eyes sparkling with pride. "Can you believe it?" she said, loud enough to turn every head. "Dylan's on the verge of $1 million TikTok deal. $1 million!" The words rippled through the yard. Murmurs, gasps, and admiring laughter followed, faces lighting up as if she had just announced a coronation. Dylan angled his phone to catch the fiery sky behind him, flashing a grin so wide the reflection from his screen glowed against his teeth. Relatives crowded around him, peppering him with questions. What kind of deal? What sponsors? When it was happening? Their voices overlapped, a chorus of fascination. No one looked at the food. No one noticed the fairy lights. The brisket might as well have been invisible. I pressed my palm against the edge of the table, the wood rough against my skin, grounding myself against the sudden hollowness in my chest. The locket at my neck thudded like an anchor, its weight hotter and heavier than the evening air. Then, unexpectedly, a voice broke through the noise. "Lena," Uncle Victor said, stepping closer, a paper plate piled with food in his hand. His lined face softened as he looked at me. "You're doing well, right? I heard you've been moving up at work." The words startled me, like cool water poured on parched soil. My heart leapt. Someone had noticed. I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, feeling my cheeks flush. "Yeah," I said, my voice lighter than it had been all night. "I just got promoted. I'm managing a $5 million project now. It's tough, but I love it." A few relatives glanced my way, nodding with interest. For one glorious moment, the spotlight shifted. I felt pride bloom in my chest, a warmth I hadn't felt in years. This was my chance, my moment to be seen, not just as the one who cooked or the one who paid, but as someone who mattered. And then Carla struck. Her laugh cut across my words like a blade. "Managing numbers on a screen isn't the same as building a future," she announced, her tone airy but sharpened with contempt. She tapped Dylan's arm, turning the attention back to him. "Dylan's pitching to sponsors. Real talent, real money." The effect was instant. Heads swiveled back to him, their questions flooding again. My words dissolved in the air like smoke, erased as if they had never been spoken. Dylan flashed his phone screen, showing off snippets of his latest vlog, his grin stretching wider under the eager eyes around him. I froze, my hand still halfway to a forkful of brisket I no longer wanted. The rich, smoky scent that had once felt like comfort now clung bitterly in my throat. My ears filled with the sound of chatter, but underneath it, all I heard was silence, the silence of being erased. Why am I always invisible to them? My fingers curled around the locket at my throat, the cool metal pressing into my palm. It had always been a reminder of sacrifice, of loyalty, of everything I had given to hold my family together. But tonight, it felt like a shackle, dragging me down, chaining me to a place where I could never win, no matter how much I gave. The sunset deepened into night, purple shadows stretching long across the grass. My fairy lights glowed gently, but no one glanced up. My food vanished from plates, but no one thanked me. Even my promotion, the triumph I had bled for, was swept away, eclipsed by a promise of money that didn't even exist yet. Carla's laughter rose again, shrill and triumphant, riding over the music, over the conversations, over the fragile hope I had carried into this night. "Dylan's going to put us on the map," she said, her eyes flicking briefly to me, daring me to challenge her narrative. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing a smile that felt like a mask stretched too thin. Inside, my insides coiled tight, a storm brewing just beneath the surface. The music strummed on, the mountains faded into shadow, and though I stood surrounded by family, I had never felt more utterly alone. It happened faster than I could stop myself. 1 second, I was sitting there at the picnic table, forcing a smile, while Carla bragged about Dylan's so-called $1 million deal. The next, my chest erupted with a heat I couldn't swallow anymore. My voice tore out of me before I could reel it back. "Dylan," I snapped, my hand slamming against the table, rattling the empty bottles. "I've funded $10,000 of your failed vlogs. $10,000 that came out of my pocket, my paycheck, my life." The words cut through the backyard like a blade. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the kids chasing each other on the lawn froze, their laughter dissolving into uneasy silence. Dylan's smirk faltered, his phone dipping toward the ground. All eyes shifted to me, the invisible sister who had suddenly caught fire. Carla didn't flinch. She turned slowly, lips curling into that smile I knew too well. Thin, sharp, poisonous. "Oh, Lena," she sneered, her voice dripping with mock pity. "You think your spreadsheets and paychecks make you our hero? You're not a savior. You're just a cash machine, not my sister." The words landed harder than I expected. I felt them physically, like someone had reached inside and twisted something raw. She didn't stop. She leaned forward, her eyes glittering under the fairy lights I had strung, her voice loud enough to crush the night. "I never needed you. Remember our pinky swear? To always share, to always choose each other?" She let out a bitter laugh that sliced straight through me. "That died the day you chose your paycheck over family." My breath caught. That pinky swear. Tiny hands linked under the blanket fort in our childhood room. Whispers of loyalty in the dark. It had been the one thing I thought we still shared, even if everything else had cracked. How could she throw that in my face, weaponize it like a knife? Around us, the barbecue dissolved. Aunt Rosa's hand flew to her mouth, her beer bottle slipping from her grasp. It shattered against the patio, foamy liquid spreading across the concrete like a wound no one wanted to touch. Uncle Victor froze mid-bite, his fork hanging in the air as though even gravity couldn't move him anymore. A cousin near the grill reached out to turn down the music, and suddenly the yard was smothered in silence, the country song collapsing into nothing. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, feel the locket digging into my skin. My fingers clenched around it so tightly I thought the chain might snap. That locket had been my tether, my anchor, but in that moment it felt like it was burning me alive, branding me with every sacrifice I had ever made, every dollar I had ever handed over, every moment I had spent trying to hold us together. Carla's words lingered in the air, heavy and acrid, like smoke that refused to clear. I searched the faces around me, hoping for someone to speak, to say anything, to tell me I wasn't crazy. But all I saw was hesitation, pity, confusion. No one moved to stand beside me. Not Rosa, not Victor, not even Mia, who had whispered warnings into my ear just hours earlier. I felt the walls of that backyard closing in. The fairy lights I'd hung glowed above me like a cruel reminder, each bulb a tiny star mocking my hope. My brisket, the cornbread, the craft beer, they might as well have been invisible, swallowed whole by Carla's venom. My throat burned as I pushed back from the table. The chair scraped against the patio, loud and ugly in the silence. No one stopped me. No one tried. I walked past them all, past Dylan still clutching his phone, his face caught between shame and calculation, past Rosa with her trembling hands, past Victor's frozen stare. My steps were heavy, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The night air hit me like a shock. The July heat had finally broken, leaving a breeze cool enough to sting the sweat on my skin. Above me, the Colorado sky stretched wide and starry, impossibly beautiful, achingly indifferent. I tilted my head back, letting the starlight sting my eyes, but it didn't wash away Carla's words. They burned inside me, branded into the marrow of who I was, not my sister, just a cash machine. Each word echoed like a wound I couldn't stop pressing. I reached up and gripped the locket again, my nails biting into the metal. For a heartbeat, I thought about ripping it off, hurling it into the night sky, watching it disappear into the dark. But I couldn't. It was all I had left, the last thread tying me to a bond that had just been declared dead. So I kept walking, past the picnic tables, past the grill smoke, past the fragments of glass glinting under the fairy lights. Each step felt final, like I was walking out of a life I had built on sacrifices no one had asked for and no one cared about. Behind me, the silence stretched, broken only by the faint hiss of the spilled beer soaking into the concrete. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Under that wide Colorado sky, with Carla's betrayal seared into me deeper than any scar, I left the backyard behind, each star above me bearing silent witness to the moment my family broke for good. Part 09. Reward. The rooftop bar buzzed with life, but all I could hear was Carla's voice echoing in my head. "You're just a cash machine, not my sister." The words clung to me like smoke, and no amount of laughter or clinking glasses around me could wash them away. Denver's skyline stretched out before me, glittering under the night sky, each skyscraper lit like a defiant torch against the dark. I wrapped my fingers around the locket at my neck, the chain biting into my skin. It was supposed to be my anchor. Instead, it felt like a weight dragging me backward, tethering me to promises that had already been broken. Tears blurred the skyline until the lights melted into one another, golden streaks across the velvet night. I closed my eyes, and there it was, the memory I had tried so hard to bury. We were kids again, sitting in our bedroom with the glow of a flashlight bouncing off the walls of our blanket fort. Carla's little finger hooked around mine, her eyes so serious for someone who still couldn't sleep without a nightlight. "We'll always be close," she whispered, her breath warm against the musty blanket fabric. "Always share, always choose each other." That memory hit harder now than ever. She had taken those words, our words, and turned them into a weapon, a reminder of what she believed I had killed by choosing a paycheck. My chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. "Lena," I flinched, wiping at my eyes quickly. Maya was leaning on the bar railing beside me, her drink untouched, her gaze steady. She had been my mentor for years, guiding me through work challenges, but in this moment, she wasn't my colleague. She was the only person who could see the cracks. "Cut them off," she said softly but firmly. "You've carried them long enough. You've paid the rent, the bills, the extras, and for what? For them to spit on you? Cut them off, Lena." Her words landed heavy, but instead of piercing me like Carla's, they settled deep in my bones. They felt like truth. My breath came shaky, uneven, but as I looked back out at the skyline, something inside me shifted. The city lights didn't just shine, they seemed to cheer, urging me forward. "This isn't revenge," I whispered to myself, my thumb rubbing the locket's edge. "It's me taking my life back." Later that night, I sat in my loft, the fairy lights still strung across the balcony from the barbecue plans that had never been mine. The room was dark, except for the glow of my laptop screen, cold blue light washing over my trembling hands. The cursor blinked at me like a heartbeat, waiting. I opened the first tab, Carla's rent payments. For years, every first of the month, I had been the safety net, transferring money into her account so she could catch her breath. My breath shook as I hovered over the cancel button. I could almost hear her voice in my head, mocking me, calling me selfish, bougie, just a paycheck. Click. The confirmation message popped up, and a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying loosened around my chest. Next tab, Dylan's subscriptions. I had been paying for his editing software, his streaming services, even his Wi-Fi when he claimed he couldn't afford it. "For the brand, Lena," he always said, flashing that influencer grin. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the list, each one another chain I hadn't seen until now. Click, click, click. The list emptied, the charges gone. My fingers were shaking so badly I had to steady them against the desk, but with each cancellation it felt like another chain snapped free. The last tab sat waiting, insurance. Their coverage, their safety net, their fallback, all under my name. My hand hovered, frozen. 1,000 what-ifs clawed at me. What if Carla needed it? What if Dylan got hurt? What if I was making a mistake? My locket pressed against my chest, heavy with memory, heavy with betrayal. Then I remembered her words, venomous under the fairy lights. "Not my sister." Click. It was done. For a long moment I just sat there in the glow of the screen, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. The cursor blinked again, patient, steady, as if daring me to backtrack. But I didn't. I leaned back in my chair, my body shaking with a mix of grief and something sharper, freedom. My hands covered my face as sobs finally broke loose, but even through the tears I felt lighter. The last step was the locket. I pulled it off my neck, the chain sliding free, cool against my damp skin. Setting it on the desk, I opened the account linked to it. The funds I had saved for Carla, for us, for family emergencies. My throat tightened as I typed the transfer. Redirecting the funds into my own account wasn't just a financial move, it was a declaration. I was done being their lifeline. When the confirmation flashed on the screen, I exhaled so hard it felt like my lungs might collapse. For the first time in years, I wasn't holding my breath for them. I was breathing for me. I lifted my head and looked out through the loft's wide windows. Denver sparkled back at me, the city alive with energy. Each light seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat, a chorus of tiny cheers in the night. For the first time in so long, I didn't feel invisible. "This isn't revenge," I whispered again, my voice steadier now. "It's freedom." And for once, I believed it. The morning after I cut them off, chaos slammed into me before I even got out of bed. My phone buzzed so violently on the nightstand that it slid against the wood, knocking my half-empty glass of water. The vibration felt like it was shaking through my ribs. I blinked against the pale Denver sunlight leaking through my blinds, the thin gold lines striping my loft walls. For a moment, I almost convinced myself it was just another workday. But then I picked up my phone. The screen was a battlefield. 12 missed calls, 6 voicemails, dozens of texts stacking one over another, bright red alerts screaming like alarms. The silence of my loft, the faint hum of the fridge, the whisper of cars far below, was crushed by that storm of notifications. Carla's entire world had collapsed overnight, and the rubble was spilling into mine. I tapped the first voicemail, and a gruff, clipped voice filled the room. "This is regarding Carla's rent. The payment hasn't cleared. I need confirmation immediately, or we'll begin eviction proceedings." It was her landlord. His irritation was cold, businesslike, the kind of tone that made my stomach twist because I'd heard it before, always smoothed over by my money, always solved before Carla ever felt the weight. Not this time. I leaned back against the headboard, my throat tight. For years I'd been the invisible safety net, and now that I'd stepped away, everything unraveled in less than 24 hours. The next voicemail made me flinch. Carla's voice shrieked through the speaker, jagged, breaking. "Lena, I'm sick. You've ruined us. Do you even care? You left us with nothing, nothing." Her words cracked into sobs, but I could hear it. Not grief, not illness, performance. Each sob was sharp, intentional, a hook meant to drag me back into her net of guilt. My chest burned, fury pressing against exhaustion. Sick? Really? After everything, that was the card she played? Then another buzz, a text this time. From Mia. "No hospital, she's lying. She forged your name on Grandma's inheritance for Dylan." The words glowed at me like fire. I sat up so fast the blanket wrapped around my legs. Forged my name? On Grandma's inheritance? My throat closed, eyes blurring as I reread the message again and again. "She stole from me and still dares to lie?" I whispered into the empty loft, my voice trembling. All the rent checks, all the insurance payments, all the help I had given. It twisted into something darker in that instant. This wasn't just manipulation. This was theft carved into legal documents. The phone lit up again. Carla. Her name pulsed on the screen like a warning. Against my better judgment, I answered. "You'll regret this, Lena," she screamed, her voice so shrill it rattled through the speaker. "You think cutting us off makes you powerful? I'll sue you for abandonment. You hear me? Abandonment." My hand clenched so tightly around the phone that my knuckles ached. My breath shook, but my voice came out steady, low, full of fury. "Carla, you forged my name. Don't you dare talk to me about abandonment." There was silence on her end, thick and telling. For a beat, I knew she didn't have an excuse. Then she hissed, "Mia doesn't know what she's talking about. She's just a kid. You'll come crawling back. You always do." I didn't let her spew more poison. I hung up. The quiet that followed rang louder than her threats. I sat there, my phone still hot in my palm, my body trembling. Outside my window, Denver stretched wide beneath the morning sky. The mountains loomed, their peaks catching the light, glowing golden and immovable. They felt like a mirror of what I needed to be, unyielding, impossible to bend. I dragged my laptop across the desk, flipping it open with hands that still shook. My inbox glowed back at me, empty, waiting. I opened a new email, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. My breath hitched, uneven, but I began to type. Carla, $800 a month in rent. Dylan, $200 a month in subscriptions, insurance, $1,000 a year, groceries, utilities, extras. Line after line, the numbers stacked like bricks in a wall, suffocating in their weight. Over $12,000 a year. $12,000 I had been pouring into their lives, while mine scraped for air. With every keystroke, I felt the tremor in my hands shift into something steadier. This wasn't begging to be noticed. This wasn't defending myself. It was evidence, my case, my truth. Finally, I wrote the line that had lived in my throat for years, clawing at me. I am done being your lifeline. I stared at it, the sentence burning into me. My finger hovered over the send key, my chest pounding, my skin hot. Then, with a single motion, I pressed it. The whoosh of the email leaving my outbox was soft, almost anticlimactic, but to me, it was thunder. It was a door slamming shut. I leaned back in my chair, turning toward the window. The mountains towered steady against the sky, vast and unmovable. My chest rose and fell, slower now, calmer. For the first time in years, I felt the faint outline of freedom brushing against my ribs. Carla's threats, her lies, her theft, they could no longer hold me. This wasn't revenge, it wasn't cruelty, it was survival. And for the first time in this war, I wasn't on defense. Therapy was like walking into a room where every wall was lined with mirrors. I had spent so much of my life looking anywhere but at myself, always focusing on Carla, Dylan, the next bill, the next emergency. But in that small office, painted in muted blues, softly lit by a single lamp that glowed like a lantern, the mirrors came alive. The scent of lavender from a diffuser floated in the air, calming at first, then almost suffocating as the therapist's voice asked questions that peeled back the stories I had built to survive. Each session was its own excavation. Carla's words were stripped from me like old cracking paint, exposing the raw wood beneath. One week I admitted how I had wired her rent before even paying my own. Another week I replayed her voice calling me a cash machine, and I realized I had believed her. My therapist leaned forward once, pen resting quietly against her notebook, and said, "It sounds like you carried her survival on your back and she convinced you it was love." I stared at the floor, the carpet woven with pale gray threads. My voice cracked as I whispered, "She said I was her lifeline." "Were you?" the therapist asked gently. I shook my head. "No, I wasn't her lifeline. I was her wallet." The silence that followed felt heavy, but for the first time in years, it didn't crush me. It gave me room to breathe. I walked out that day into Denver's cold air, the sky sharp with winter blue, and felt lighter than I had in years. By spring, I had moved. My loft, haunted by the buzzing of my phone and the endless guilt, was gone. My new condo overlooked the city, its balcony alive with neon lights and the pulse of traffic. I remember the first night I stood out there, the skyline glittering like a constellation I could finally touch. The hum of the city below didn't feel overwhelming anymore. It felt like possibility. I poured that possibility into my work. What began as a shaky decision, launching my own freelance data consultancy, quickly grew into something I could stand on. My laptop, once a device tethered to late-night transfers to Carla, became the gateway to contracts signed in my name, invoices paid to me. Each new client was a reminder. I was more than a background figure. I was building something of my own. The money mattered, yes, but the independence mattered more. For the first time, every dollar I earned stayed in my account, a foundation for my future instead of fuel for Carla's flames. What truly anchored me, though, was family. Real family. Aunt Rosa and Mia became my circle, my chosen people. Rosa's home smelled of cinnamon and butter, her kitchen always warm, her arms always open. Game nights grew into rituals. The dining room glowed under yellow light, board games scattered across the table, dice rolling, cards flipping, laughter bouncing off the walls. Mia would nudge Rosa and accuse her of bending the rules, and Rosa would throw her hands up dramatically, insisting, "I'm just creative with strategy," until we all burst out laughing. Those nights carried no trace of tension, no shadow of Carla's demands, just joy, just connection. It amazed me how simple love could feel when it wasn't tangled in manipulation. We didn't need pinky swears or promises of forever. We needed presence, and presence was exactly what Rosa and Mia gave me. Carla, meanwhile, faded into whispers. People told me she and Dylan had moved into a cramped apartment on the far edge of town. The $1 million deal Dylan once bragged about had fizzled into steam. Now he pulled espresso shots at a coffee shop. His charisma traded for customer service smiles. Carla worked retail, her energy drained by long shifts, her charm buried beneath fluorescent lights and endless returns. Their silence was deafening. No voicemails, no texts, no late-night guilt trips, just absence. A void where chaos once lived. Sometimes I wondered if she would ever admit the truth. If she'd ever acknowledge the inheritance forgery, the lies, the way she'd hollowed me out until I had nothing left to give. But then I would step onto my balcony, the city glowing beneath me, the mountains steady on the horizon, and the thought would slip away. One night, as the wind tugged gently at my hair, I reached for the locket around my neck. It used to weigh me down, pressing into my chest like a constant reminder of obligation, but now it rested cool, light, almost peaceful. I closed my eyes and whispered into the night, "I'm not their cash machine. I'm enough." The city seemed to hum back in agreement, the rumble of trains in the distance, the buzz of neon signs, the faint laughter from the street below. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged to myself. Therapy had taught me that survival wasn't the same as living. Moving had shown me that starting over wasn't failure. It was freedom. Rosa and Mia proved that love didn't need to be earned with sacrifice. It could be given freely, joyfully, without a price tag attached. Carla's shadow lingered, yes, but it no longer stretched over me. It was hers to carry, not mine. And as I stood there, breathing in the night air, the truth settled in my chest. The girl who once measured her worth in dollar amounts and monthly payments was gone. In her place stood a woman who laughed around dining tables, who faced the skyline without fear, who could say with certainty that she was enough. That was my resurrection. Not revenge, not victory over Carla. Just me, alive, free, whole. A year later, I was hiking up a trail that wound through the Colorado mountains, the kind of place where silence had its own voice. The ground beneath my boots was firm but scattered with pine needles, their earthy scent mingling with the crisp bite of winter air. Each breath I exhaled puffed out like smoke, dissolving into the sky as though carrying away the remnants of my old life. My backpack was light, lighter than any burden I had carried before, because I wasn't hauling guilt, obligation, or secrets anymore. Just me. The cabin revealed itself slowly, tucked in a clearing between tall evergreens. Its wood was weathered, the kind that whispered of storms it had survived, and smoke drifted lazily from the chimney, curling against a sky pricked with stars. Behind me, Denver glittered below, its city lights twinkling faintly, no longer a reminder of chaos or betrayal, but a symbol of distance conquered. That skyline used to mock me, flashing with every bill I paid, every night I sacrificed. Now it looked like a field of diamonds scattered on velvet, a city I had left and returned to on my own terms. I reached up, fingers brushing against the locket around my neck. For years, it had been an anchor, dragging me into waters of shame and debt. Every time it touched my skin, it reminded me of Carla's manipulations, Dylan's demands, and the endless cycle of giving without receiving. But tonight, it felt cool and steady, no longer heavy but grounding. Not a burden, but a keepsake of survival, a marker of freedom. Inside, the cabin was warm. The fire crackled, its glow flickering across wooden walls, painting them in shades of gold and amber. I set down my bag and pulled out the journal I had carried but avoided for months. The leather was worn, its corners curled, its pages swollen from years of being thumbed through. Carla's handwriting sprawled unevenly across the pages, sometimes hurried, sometimes painfully deliberate, as though she wanted to be remembered but not understood. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, not because I feared the words, but because I knew they had the power to stir ghosts. I turned a few pages until a line stopped me cold. Dylan's future is secure, but at what cost? I stared at the ink until it blurred, my throat tightening. The words echoed like a riddle, their meaning tangled in half-truths. What had she given up? What had she taken? Had there been more betrayals hidden in her silence, more deals struck in the shadows? Or was it another manipulation, her way of planting seeds that would keep me wondering forever? I'll never know. And maybe that's the lesson. Carla's truth had always been a maze, one she built to keep me wandering. Closing the journal, I realized I didn't need to solve it. I didn't need her confession to validate my survival. I had already found my answer, not in her words, but in my life now. I leaned back in the chair, firelight warming my face, and thought of Ryan. He wasn't part of the chaos. He came later, in the calm after the storm. A graphic designer with gentle hands and an easy laugh. He wasn't loud or demanding. He was steady, the kind of steady I didn't realize I had been craving. He didn't measure me by what I could pay, what I could sacrifice, or what I owed. He just saw me. We had built quiet rituals, sharing tea on balconies, sketching plans for the future on napkins, sitting in silence that didn't feel heavy. With him, I learned that love doesn't need to be bought, and family doesn't need to be begged for. True family is who sees your worth without asking for proof. Rosa had shown me that, Mia had reminded me, and Ryan, in his quiet way, had confirmed it. I turned toward the window, watching Denver's lights blink in the valley below. A year ago, those lights felt unreachable, like freedom reserved for someone else. Now they simply looked alive, glowing in rhythm with the heartbeat I had finally reclaimed. "I don't need Carla's truth," I whispered, the words steady, certain. "I've found my own, and maybe that was the gift in all of this. Not closure from her, but freedom from needing it. Not a resolution tied with a bow, but the courage to live without one. To walk forward even when the story isn't neatly finished. So now I want to turn to you. Have you ever carried a family secret that weighed like a stone in your chest? Have you ever had to step away from people who called themselves family but treated you like currency, like obligation, like anything but love? Did you find the strength to say no? To choose yourself? To walk into a life that was yours and yours alone? What gave you that strength? Share your story below. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that we are never truly alone in these battles. And if my journey reminded you of your own, don't forget to subscribe for more stories about breaking chains, finding strength, and discovering that sometimes the family you choose is the one that saves you. The fire popped loudly, sending a spark upward, and I reached for my locket one last time. It rested cool against my skin, no longer an anchor, but a reminder, a symbol that I am enough, and so are you.